Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today, we are going to talk with Ashley Quamme about marriage and money conflict, how to work through the tough stuff. Ashley has been a couples therapist for well over a decade. She holds a Master of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy, a graduate certificate in financial therapy, and holds designations as a Certified Financial Behavior Specialist and Certified Financial Therapist-Practitioner. Enjoy today's show. Ashley, we are thrilled that you joined us today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
How do you engage the sort of relatively less engaged partner?
It can be a really difficult spot just depending upon the overarching couple dynamic there. And so when there is potential for anything to be, I say, difficult, the best approach as a partner is to proceed gently. If you want to say with caution, but I prefer to say proceed gently. Dr. John Gottman, for those of you who may be familiar with any of his work, he refers to it as a gentle startup. And so I think that can be just a nice way to, approach something that maybe your spidey senses kind of say, I don't know how receptive my partner may be to this based on their actions or previous conversations. And so maybe what that sounds like in this case would be something like, hey, babe, or whatever it is. Hey, hun, hey, buttercup, whatever your cutesy little name kind of is there for your partner. There's this thing that I'd really like to talk to you about as it relates to our money. And I've been thinking a lot about this, financial habit, insert financial habit. I've been thinking a lot about this. And the more I've thought about it, I'm really interested in maybe making some changes around that. What are your thoughts? And just asking maybe from a place more of curiosity, what are your thoughts? Instead of coming at it as a you need to or we need to, that can elicit a very defensive response from your partner. And maybe you've seen that and your intentions might be good and maybe you're accurate, but no matter, the thing that I like to try to communicate to couples is your approach matters a whole lot more in scenarios like this than the content or what it is that you are actually saying. And so if you can get the approach right, you set yourself up for success in that conversation, hopefully, fingers crossed, potentially at least being able to go better. Now, easier said than done, I know, but there's a couple of ways that, I'll tell partners, hey, practice that in the mirror a few times. Practice kind of what you're going to say. Make sure that you're emotionally in a more regulated place, that you're not super stressed out or what have you. But, if you can get the delivery right, if you can approach it from a gentle, kind of curious place, more than likely your partner's going to be more receptive to hearing what it is that you have to say. And in this case, maybe the financial habit that you're trying to change.
All right. So I want to interject something. If you go to your, let's say, you sit down like, hey, buttercup, I want to have a good conversation with you. And you do all the right things. It's a money date. You're in a relaxed setting, et cetera, just as you say. And in your marriage, you have all of your money pooled together. And, again, the context here is that, one of you is not making good financial decisions based on your joint goals in your marriage. And then the spouse's response to that is, well, I make good money and I just kind of want to spend it how I want. What do you say? First of all, I guess let me back up. When you hear that, what's your response to that?
What a jerk. No, I'm just kidding.
Brian, are you looking for personal advice here? Or is this
is not me.
A hypothetical?
Oh. Okay. No, this is, I can assure you, this is not me. My wife's actually, I'm definitely married up. She would never say that. So anyway.
Yeah. So certainly that is the case, right? Where, your partner, especially if it's a breadwinner, situation can shut things down like very quickly. And if that's the case, continuing to push and pursue that is likely not going to be helpful in that moment for the two of you. And
Yeah.
usually we know that. I hear couples say that, like, I knew that it wasn't going to end well, but I just had to keep going. And that, you run the risk of getting into that kind of pursue defense, kind of dynamic. And that's really not helpful.
Mhm.
Um, so a few thoughts there. One, thinking about maybe what are some things that you have control and influence over when it comes to the financial aspect. Maybe there are some pieces there that you yourself can do that could have or make some gains there on the financial side. What parts are you dependent upon, for your spouse in terms of financial behavior? Um, I- you know, looking at some of that. The other piece here is maybe that's an indication that it would be helpful to go and see a financial therapist or a couples therapist if your partner, you continue to kind of make these, I say, passes, right? And like you're using gentle startups and you're trying to do things like on your own, and you very gently kind of try to approach the conversation, and your partner just keeps shutting you down and shutting you down. It might be time to maybe seek out outside help to help you guys facilitate better dialogue and have a, kind of expert there gain some deeper insight into what may be going on.
And I queued that question up right away because, throughout the rest of this conversation, we're going to be talking about strategies that people can employ, assuming the partner's at least willing to entertain how to work together. However, if the conclusion is based on being shut down immediately, repeatedly, is just not going to happen. I want to point that out to our listeners. You can go to just Google Financial Therapy Association directory. You can find a financial therapist. You can meet with someone like Ashley, because ultimately you need a third party who's trained to manage those situations, because the everyday person isn't, and because the in that dynamic, that spouse could be perceived as the obstacle, the enemy, the person that's trying to control them. And you really need a third person to be able to work through these challenges if they're just shutting you down. So anyhow, not to, I don't want to take up too much time because I know Bruce folks, reminder, it's Dr. Ross, who's a marriage and family therapist as well, and certified financial therapist. He has a question for Ashley.
Yeah, Ashley, as you just said, it's so easy for couples to get defensive or the conversation become conflictual just when we're talking about money, right? It's one of the number one reasons people fight in a marriage, and nobody wants to argue about money in their marriage, right? But we still have to create these or make these financial decisions. We have to go through a lot of these financial challenges, and that is difficult. So how do you motivate clients to take action through having some of these money conversations?
Yeah,
How do
some
you
of it
get to the
starts
motivation?
Yeah, some of it starts with, I think, first just understanding where some things come from. So, if you think about the iceberg analogy there, what's below the waters is oftentimes a lot bigger.
Mhm.
You don't see it, right? And so it's not on the
Mhm.
outside, it's not obvious. And so, from a motivation place, I like to at least start with understanding what's below the waters that maybe is contributing to a lack of motivation there. And there's a couple of ways that I like to go about doing that. And what I find is for couples is what's really cool is that when we start to kind of both look below the waters and make some connections there as far as why it is, I say, my thing is think, feel, do. And so I'll say, like, why it is that couples or each individual partner, why do you think, feel, do money the way that you do? Those connections
Love
really
that.
start to then help shape from a motivation place of where do we go next. The narrative that I have in my head around how it is that I do money. Do I like that? Do I want to keep parts of it? What do I want to shed? And really just kind of building upon that. And, the cool thing for partners is that hearing your spouse go through some of those exercises, make some of the connections, and pinpoint things maybe from previous experiences. It builds a lot of intimacy there, and it's cool to watch and unfold. And my therapist heart flutters and gets really giddy like every time that it happens. But when we can make those connections around why it is that you think, feel, and do money the way that you do, all of a sudden, we start to kind of bridge that gap of possibilities and, okay, now what's possible? And what is my vision? Like, what is kind of then my hope for next steps? And, I see at least that when we start to form attachments to maybe that vision or those next steps, it really does become motivating for wanting to change the present. The other part, I guess, of that from a motivation place is, starting small and starting slow. Maybe you guys have had this experience. I'm guilty of it. Anytime I make kind of I don't know, new connection or learn something new, I want to jump on it and I want to do like all the things right away. Like I'm one of those when I make goals in January, I want to accomplish every single one of them in January. I'm so
I get
excited to do
excited.
it.
I get
Yeah.
excited and I just want to like go for it. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah. And so the thing there, at least, and I view some of my role is just kind of, let's slow down a little bit and create maybe very small steps that we can take. One, so that we're building lasting change. And so that we're, helping to kind of stretch that motivation, if you will, out. So we're not burning out there on that end. So uncovering what's underneath and then starting slow, creating some small steps, building small habits that way.
Ashley, money is emotional, and it can be hard to look at life through the lens of someone else when you're frustrated or you're frustrated yourself. So, if that's the case, what are some tools you can use to improve empathy and your own active listening skills?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Brene Brown has a really great video that I like to show in teaching trainings, but also to couples too, where maybe empathy is lacking to some extent.
Not
That
as good as it
muscle,
can be.
right, right. That the empathy muscle just has not been worked out in a very, very long time. And so she has a brilliant video that talks about the difference of empathy versus sympathy. And so I encourage everyone to go and watch it because it's profound. And what she talks about, in this video is, the difference kind of between the two, and sympathy being that, kind of more fix it, like I know better, like, oh yeah, I kind of feel for you, but it's, there's still kind of that gap there or wall there in between. And, empathy, she says, is feeling with someone. And that can be a really difficult thing when if your partner is struggling and you're angry with them and you're frustrated, it can be difficult to put aside your own stuff for a moment and just feel with your partner. Easier said than done. And so, some things in being, strategies, I guess, being able to do that. I encourage a lot of taking breaths, like slow, deep breaths, like when we're having conversations that are hard. It feels really weird for couples, and they'll say, like this is not natural, and this is weird to take this many deep breaths in a hard conversation. And it's true. Like it is kind of weird. However, what it's also doing, it's slowing your system down from a physiological place. And if you can slow that system down, it will help you to be able to activate that empathy within inside of you to be able to feel with your partner and place yourself really in on their side of the table and try to understand how based on their lived experiences, based on maybe their money story, how it is that they would come to think or feel that way in this particular situation.
We recently had John McCaskill on our podcast, and he is a retired Navy SEAL, and he wrote a book about essentially how to employ a lot of the strategies that he learned in your everyday life to be, mentally strong. And that was one of the first things that he brought up, was the importance of, he calls it box breathing. Breathe in deeply for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, release for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. And I started doing that. That helps me quite a bit. I noticed that my wife's done that many times throughout our marriage naturally, because I tend to say stupid things, and she's, God bless her, the patient, understanding, empathetic one. But it really does work. Again, it's just box breathing. Think of it as a box. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, down, release for 4, and then again, hold for 4. And for our listeners, I will be sure to include a link to that Brene Brown empathy versus sympathy video in our podcast notes. I have that open right now.
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show.
Ashley, I got to say, you have such a calming presence and such a beautiful way of, going through these definitions and describing everything. I can see why you're such a great therapist. And I truly mean that.
Thank you.
And I want to use kind of an example, and especially an example that's, I know, very close to Brian, because opposites attract. It is not uncommon for savers and spenders to marry one another, and Brian knows all about this as the extreme saver. But how do you address the saver-spender dynamics in a marriage? I mean, I guess using even some of these empathy and listening skills.
Yeah, I'll share personally, like that's a dynamic that my husband, he's also a financial planner, and he is surprisingly the extreme saver. And I get a lot of emotional satisfaction from spending. So I will just say it that way. And so it's a dynamic that it is emotional. Yes, it is. So I don't like to label it, right? But I get a lot of emotional satisfaction from spending. So that's my reframe on it. But to your point, it's a very common dynamic. Kind of extreme, in terms of where on the continuum do they fall, but just that difference there between saving and spending. It can be really tricky. I like to point out to couples that both are a strength and that you need both. And when, one partner is more of a saver and the other partner has a lot of emotional satisfaction from spending, it's actually a really great thing for your marriage. It's a wonderful thing, actually. And if you can learn to lean on each other's strengths with that, you can do some really cool things. There are definitely times when you need to be more on the save heavy end. There are also times when you need to be, spending more to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And so, maybe a little bit of discernment, kind of knowing and agreeing kind of when to and when not to, leaning into those positions is incredibly helpful. Very early on, at least in our marriage, that was a time, I was 22 when I got married, and we had student loans, as many people do, and not making a lot of money because as a therapist starting out, shockingly, you don't make diddly squat. You don't make peanuts. And, Clayton at the time was in the military. And so we were on a fixed, kind of fixed income there in terms of what, he made and could make. All of that to say is that was a time in our life when income was really low. However, the need to save was really high, based on our ages. Knowing, hey, this is a time we should be putting into our retirement accounts, because from a compound interest standpoint, if we can put some of that in now, we'll be able to maybe enjoy some of this later. And that was really hard for me because I wanted to go on cool trips and I like shoes. And, I also enjoy Chick-fil-A. And so, there's a lot of things there that I wouldn't say that I had to compromise, but on my end, I did need to take a step back and appreciate his perspective and see the bigger picture, but also have some pretty honest and hard conversations of like, hey, if we do this now, like, here's my fears that it's going to be this way forever and we're never going to go on this trip. And so, it was a lot of just honest conversation, sometimes not always smooth, sometimes not always smooth conversations, but just honest around, this is where I think we need to be. And I had to put my trust in Clayton that, okay, if I take a step back and if I can trust his strength of saving, yes, this will pay off. Fast forward, we've been married 16 years now. And, we've come a long way and we do spend, more. We did a kitchen renovation last year that if you had asked me at 22, would my husband ever spend, this kind of money on a kitchen renovation? I would have said lots of expletives, pretty much ending with no, like, no. And so we've made a lot of gains in that, but it has required trust, seeing each other as having certain strengths and knowing when to lean on those strengths, and, when to maybe step aside and not be so rigid in our position.
Ashley, so financial infidelity, that is intentionally deceiving your partner about money, is a problem in nearly half of marriages. Can you walk us through how couples can navigate the problems that arise from financial infidelity?
Yeah, those are challenges, for a lot of different reasons. When there's a relationship injury, such as a betrayal, because that's what, financial infidelity is, or infidelity. It's a type of betrayal. Those wounds, they can they can cut pretty deep. And so, depending upon personality type, depending upon, maybe history and previous injuries to the relationship, all of that, right? The kind of detail. I do like to tell clients, it can be a slow process. It can be a slow process. This isn't like a Band-Aid fix, in terms of, we uncover why, and then we just don't ever do it again. There's kind of a ripple effect, that, financial infidelity can bleed into, and, helping couples navigate that, again, first and foremost is just the expectation that this could be a slow process. Working with a professional is something that I absolutely encourage, when it comes to financial infidelity, specifically a financial couples therapist, and particularly one who has more of a mental health background, in and within couples therapy. That's my bias, but that is what I, generally typically recommend. Uncovering, the details of the act of betrayal, I think can be tricky. Most people want to know all the details. Tell me everything. I need to know everything. What else? And, I kind of say, let's proceed with caution with that, because once you know details, you can't unknow them. And so going through that very carefully, again, with a professional, around uncovering the aspects of that, what all was involved in it, the details, if you will, and, creating kind of your own couples action plan for recommitting to one another and going about the healing process, and just understanding, hopefully, each other better. And, some people say, well, you can't really come back from that kind of stuff. And, I would disagree because, I see a lot of couples that come back from, infidelity as well as financial infidelity. Not that it's easy. But, there is hope on the other side when both partners are willing and committed. And I think that's the key, is that both partners have to be willing and committed to the process of healing.
Yeah, absolutely. It can't be one-sided. And as you said, it's there's a recognition that it's not an easy process either, that it is very difficult. I mean, having just normal money conversations is very difficult, but when there's that betrayal, it's going to be, exponentially harder, but it is possible, especially as you said, with the help of experts. Tell us about your new podcast.
I'd say that's definitely switching
I
gears.
know, like kind of switching gears, but you have a new
Not to
podcast, and we
entirely
want to promote that.
switch
So,
gears. Yeah, you
tell
guys,
us
I
about
appreciate that. You guys are kind. So the new podcast is Planning and Beyond. It is geared more towards financial advisors, financial professionals. And so part of the work that I do, separate from the clinical side, is I serve as a financial behavior officer for advisory firms. And so in that role, I do some financial therapy, but I'm also helping financial advisors. My business is Beyond the Plan. So kind of cheesy. I help advisors go beyond the plan to understand how their clients think, feel, and do money, and positioning advisors as, being able to have deeper, better money conversations and, just greater overall financial well-being for their clients, but also themselves. So anyway, I say all that to say the podcast is a lot about just helping advisors with more of the financial psychology, financial therapy. There's a expression that's been going around, the human side of money. So just understanding that a little bit more, but it's also about advisors being their best selves. In the mental health space, we talk a lot about, practitioners doing their own self-care, understanding how it is that we think, understanding ourselves, and being able to do kind of our own self-work ultimately helps us to be better practitioners. So part of the podcast with Planning and Beyond is understanding the planning side better. And then the beyond is really geared towards advisors understanding themselves better so that they can show up better for their clients.
This has been a great conversation, and I know this is a tough task, but if you could try to coalesce everything about our podcast today, our episode today, into one piece of simple and actionable advice for our listeners, what would it be?
My pretty standard one, which I think applies here. I'm pretty confident it does. You can tell me if I'm wrong. My pretty standard one is to seek out professional help before things get bad. That it is okay to proactively seek out professional help from a couples therapist, a financial advisor. You don't have to wait for things to get bad or for there to be problems in your marriage in order to seek out help. So be proactive in going out and getting help.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow modern husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.